Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about the Radious Total War mod for Total War Warhammer 3. Now I've played with Radious before in other games, and while it certainly can create a good campaign experience, it does have its own flaws. Though to be fair, I do vastly prefer this over SFO. I feel like SFO has a lot of great ideas for like uniqueness of legendary lords, and so that's great about SFO. What I don't like about SFO is the glacial campaign pace, because if you make it slower for the player, you're making it slower for the AI. So it's going to take longer for AI empires to also emerge, because, well, if territory is not giving all that much until you develop it, and given the tendency of the AI to lose territory, it's not going to lead to a great campaign experience, from my perspective on the subject. And also, the vast majority of the player base, based on data from Creative Assembly, and even data that, polling shows, the vast majority of people are not interested in playing the intern button simulator. That's where I stand on SFO. Let's talk about Radious with that in mind. Now, Radious goes in a different direction. Radious has a lot to add to early game aggression. So, what Radious does is it improves your income by a fairly significant amount. Like, look at this particular province. You're seeing that I'm generating 6,700 over here in the Titan Peaks on turn 21. And these provinces are not fully developed yet. That is an insane level of income. Of course, there's a reason for it, certain buildings, all that, but still, 6,700, almost 7,000 over here. Other provinces, 3,000, 2,400, okay. That is more reasonable, but still, you can generate a significant amount of money with Radious. So Radious is all about early game aggression. It starts you out with higher tier settlements in general. And the reason that is important is when everyone's starting at a higher level, both you and AI, it means that everyone is going to get access to greater unit variety from the very beginning of a campaign. And that's really what I like about Radious. It gives you more options in a campaign than the same ones you have by default. Sure, you'll still recruit a bunch of, like, say in Morathi campaign, you'll still recruit a bunch of Dark Shards, Black Card Corsairs, and all that kind of stuff. But you can be doing so for like 40 turns in the baseline campaign, because you're not never gonna it's gonna take that long to get to like tier 4. Over here, probably turn 30, and I didn't even push for growth over here. I decided to buff on my other settlements. Though, give me like 30 turns or something like that. Once that's sorted out, I will be running around with more flexible armies in a campaign over here. There's also tier 4 minor settlements, a sub mod for this. Like, the way I view Radius is, if you want to customize your campaign as opposed to, say, FSFO, which has the settings in game, you want to use like very small some mods. So, or other mods. For instance, I got the no public order penalty that you do have to deal with on Legendary. Now, you might think I might have overdone it with public order over here, and to some extent there are some provinces I have. But there's a reason behind that. See, the way public order works in Radius is if you get over 25, you're going to start getting it. So the more public order you have, the more you'll get. And you'll get benefits like growth, recruitment, all that kind of stuff. But if you start losing public order, if you start losing control, it's going to accelerate the process. So control, so actually developing your provinces properly, as opposed to just going into a province, getting constant rebellions, because if you're playing Dark Elves, you might do so, because the way that public order works in the base game incentivizes you to do so, because the rebellions are free money and experience. So you just go into a province, you create rebellion, but even if you don't, sacking, occupying, looting settlements, there's no negatives in the base game, whereas there are plenty of negatives over here. So you don't necessarily want to do it, unless you're willing to pay the price, or unless you can get a very high level of control. You can, especially as Morathi, you can, but suffice to say that I'm having to build far more control and worry about it than I ever would in the baseline game experience. Sure, Sunny Corruption gives 5, Demand Highborn Hostages gives 5, so that's 10. So it can overcome a lot of issues. But if you start if you start sliding into negative control, is going to cause problems in your campaign. And that's one of the things I do like. That's one of the things I think SFO does better than something like territory is worth acquiring. It's worth acquiring at a high level. You don't just want to play like you do in the vanilla game where you acquire territory and you might play certain races like Dark Elves, Skaven, and Greenskins where the best thing you can do is just tear it all down, sack it, loot it, all that, and then rebuild it. Instead, you're incentivized to capture territory at a higher level with a good amount of control. You're incentivized to actually get extra control on heroes, something that I never do in the baseline game. So you're incentivized to actually care about your provinces and develop them properly, because the rewards for doing so are worth it. Like, you actually get a pretty powerful economy from settlements if you develop them properly. It may take a while. Building construction can be a bit slower than it is in the baseline game, so there are certainly some things that are slower in the baseline game, but everyone has a huge stack of resources, and what I really like about Radius, it's more about how you use those resources as opposed to having very limited choices to begin with. Yes, that's what I intensely dislike about SFO. You have very limited choices over there, whereas here you have a lot of choices in terms of armies, in terms of building, in terms of production. What are you going to do with the money? Mind you, things aren't necessarily cheap in a campaign. Buildings are not necessarily going to be extremely cheap. So just building everything willy-nilly is not necessarily going to work. Like over here, you can see that while I still have a good amount of income, that I have spent a lot of money this turn. Mostly buildings. So you gotta make those kind of decisions. It reminds me about Troy, and in a good way. Because one of the things about Total War Saga Troy, one of the great things about it, is you kind of had a similar situation in the sense that you had a ton of resources, but how you use those resources? Did you loot and occupy settlements? Did you sack them and rebuild them? Or did you just take them intact and then used where they were as a baseline and then built on top of that? That was kind of the dynamic in Troy, and it was actually a great dynamic. So that's what I'm reminded of over here with Radious Total War. I know that Radius has generally done this, like in previous games. Hell, I played Shogun 2 with this, so yeah, I'm familiar with Radius. You might think, oh, you have a ton of resources, so you don't have to worry about anything. That is not true at all, because you might have a ton of resources, so does the AI. You look at these factions, right? And it can get a bit extreme, I have to admit. But you look at these factions, because I'm playing this on Legendary very hard, so the AI is obviously getting a lot of the benefits on that difficulty. Like, you look at AI upkeep, it's fairly low. Maybe I should increase upkeep. There is a sound that increases upkeep from the default level, because I certainly could have afforded a higher upkeep. In this campaign. Maybe I should increase upkeep, because like Illyrian producing 4 full stacks of troops with just 1 province is maybe pushing it a bit on the extreme bullshit level. Maybe that is a problem. But you do see the AI, like Tyrion over here had multiple armies, and this is the prospect I have to deal with. Like, I already dealt with 1 army of Illyrian over here with these armies. Then another one is going to come. Like, Tyrion has lost everything. There is a limit to how many armies the AI can handle in a campaign. So maybe Radius by default, which doesn't just give you a ton of resources, but also lowers the upkeep. So this is with 8 armies, 28% upkeep. So I'm still paying very, very little. Granted, this is a Black Ark, but still, you kind of get the idea. Like, the upkeep, you get a lot of money, but the upkeep is also very low. I think it may go too far, but there's some mod to increase it. If you want to. I probably would recommend playing with that, because things can get a bit too ridiculous with things by default. Though it depends on the race you're playing, I would say. Some races have it better than others. That's the thing about mods, any mod. Like, they're not going to fix all the races. Dark Elves are one of the best races in the game. They remain one of the best races in the game. Though I have to make a note about the Dark Elves in both Radius and SFO. There's a ton of slaves you get in both Radius and SFO if you're playing Dark Elves. I think that's because these mods are ultimately made for a community, and a lot of the community complains about like how too few slaves are in a game. You know, maybe I'm playing the different game, but I never really had that many issues with slaves in Warhammer 3 playing the Dark Elves, and I played them quite a bit in a campaign. Now, you do traverse territory faster as well, so if you look at, or you may traverse territory faster. It does kind of feel like the movement range can be a bit higher sometimes, though not all the time. But because the AI has numerous armies, you won't just be able to show up at their capital and just take it. Like, one of my favorite invasion strategies for Lothern is ignore everything else. Just go for Lothern directly. Take out Tyrian's recruitment, his capital, eliminate that, and then deal with the counterattack. Like, I marched 3 full stacks over here, including a Bellic Arc, to do so. He had numerous armies, and this was several turns ago. He had numerous armies to throw against me, and now he's like, but he did have these 2 stacks, which I'm gonna try and defeat him over here, but it's certainly gonna be a tricky one. But yeah, it kind of gets a bit ridiculous with all them AI upkeep, like these ogres having just 2 settlements having 2 full armies. Yeah, that's a bit crazy, really, when you think about it. During the course of a campaign. Okay, beyond that, Radius also adds a bunch of unique units to a campaign. Now, in certain games, I would say, like in Shogun 2, there's a lot of fluff to it. In Warhammer 3, there's not so much. There are units like Pit Veterans, there's plenty of units. There's even the Warband upgrade system available for us if we look at that. There are certainly new units added like Shadows, Pit Veterans, all that kind of stuff, or Druki City Guards, etc. So there's tons of stuff added for every single faction, every single race, some more than others, that you would have access to. There's legacy uniqueness to something like SFO with the Legendary Lord. I mean, there are changes to them to be certain, but, you know, like when I look at like different campaign playstyles, I would say SFO does that better, but certainly there is more added to the campaigns, just not as much in individual skill lines for lords and heroes. There's a lot of units. There's a focus on very early aggression in this campaign, and I like it. Like, that's the thing. I don't care how you play the game. I think, like, starting a campaign at a higher point, and you do so. Everyone does so. In this, starting a campaign at a higher point, having a faster pace is a great experience. So, like, overall, I do like Radius. It doesn't necessarily do some of the things that SFO does, to be sure, but it has a much, much better campaign pacing and a much better campaign experience. Overall. Like, more resources, though I probably recommend the 40% upkeep increase. You also gain more skill points when you level up with lords and heroes. So one of the problems that exists in the base game, for instance, is that, you have a lot of customization for lords and heroes, but really you're not going to use all of it. Like, if you're playing Morathi, you would never want to go with her magic skill line. The reason you would never want to go with her magic skill line is, one, you can get the sorceress who can focus on that, and you're better off focusing on her blue skill line, her melee skill line, her special skill line. Also, you don't have skill lines limited, so you can get both Legendary and Lord skill lines, so you don't have those kind of limitations. But you do have choices to make with a Legendary Lord that you don't. For the practical purposes of a campaign, I understand that long term you would get everything, but in the short term, that's the point. That's the important point. The campaign is most interesting in a short term because that's when everyone's building up the empires, both you and AI. Like, the empires that are built within like the first 40 turns of a campaign, those are going to be the AI empires in general, I would say, in a campaign that you're going to have to deal with. More than that, it's very slow, very difficult for the AI to build anything like that. It just can't handle it. That's the problem. There are some AI mods I would recommend. Ultra Smart, I think Ultra Smart Aggressive AI, something like that. I'll link them in the description anyway, but there are some mods that do improve AI behavior, does make it better in terms of that. Like, turn 21, this is pretty reasonable. Though Nakari is living their last breath, it's like, yeah, don't mess with the Order Tide. The Order Tide has returned, holy shit. And with the vengeance, 5 stacks, 6 stacks, 7 stacks, Alariel, and Elfarian. 8 stacks, 9 stacks, and keep in mind, I'm going to have to deal with all that. Grombrindle is vengeance over here against Malekith. Well, very clearly a vengeance. Hargonef has been reduced. Okay, so in this case, I am the last great hope of the Dark Elves. When Morathi is the last great hope of the Dark Elves, things have gone really, really badly in a campaign. Let me look at Cafe. Maybe things are better in Cafe. No. No. So yeah, it does create some interesting campaign dynamics when everyone has resources, though I'd probably say the baseline of Radius is too much, so increasing the upkeep is probably better. Because, for instance, in this campaign, like, generally speaking, the Dark Elves are designed to rely on looting and sacking settlements, so the fact that I didn't have to do that with the baseline upkeep is kind of terrible. And besides, like, even if I had 40% extra upkeep, I'm sure I could probably, I'm sure I could probably, like, maintain these armies. Maybe I have a bit of a negative, but it would force me to rely more on sacking and looting, which would then, force me to worry about control more, worry about my heroes to control more. So that is great. Here are the things that, like, I don't like. Like with SFO and quite a few other mods, the garrisons of Radius are stronger. Now, this is less of a problem for the player, I wish to point out. This is less of a problem for the player because you have more resources to deal with this. So the most annoying campaign dynamic can happen when you have very limited resources. So you basically have one army. You're struggling to have one army, but you have to deal with a powerful garrison, 10 plus units, and then an entire stack of troops, at minimum, if you're playing on Legendary. Maybe even more, because the AI does cheat, so you're likely going to see 2 stacks. The problem with strong garrisons, it's also something that's going to limit the AI and how it builds its empire. So the AI is going to build empires slower, and it's going to benefit some factions more than others. For whatever reason, I would say ogres are completely and utterly broken with this. Like, you look at Greasus. Holy shit, this Greasus going places. Like, I never expected to see Greasus conquering Kebie in the campaign. Like, I've seen Greasus survive some campaigns. Greasus marching on Kebie and slaughtering his way, as well as holding his own against Grimgor, is an exceptional campaign situation that I've never ever seen before, because he's likely dealt with Gorst. So yeah, maybe that upkeep situation is a bit too much. Also, like, yeah, certain things like the ogres just, I don't know, like, the ogres feel like a bit ridiculous, at least in turns there are resolved. Like, there are resolved with this seems crazy, I have to say. Like, just there are resolved, not their actual battle prowess. That's more reasonable in terms of rebalancing. So the stronger garrisons could really do without that. Like, I make the point, like, I think the vanilla garrisons of Warhammer 3, as they currently are right now, not as they were at launch, and not as they were in Realms of Chaos, but as they are currently at the moment, are fine. For the most part. Some garrisons can be a bit ridiculous, vampire counts, for instance. But then again, vampire counts do have plenty of issues as a race, so especially under AI control. There's a reason why Vlad very rarely takes control of the Empire in any campaign, although who knows what will happen in this campaign. Sterling is marching a massive military force. Yeah, this is a bit ridiculous, so okay, that's one thing. The other thing I dislike is, like, it's great to have multiple armies, it's great to have those tools, that's fantastic. Here's the problem, when everyone has massive armies on the campaign map, it really degrades your performance on the campaign map, like, even on a top-end computer. So it's great to have this, but the game was not designed for this very clearly. Like, it's one thing if the major empires have a lot of armies. That's one thing. But when every faction has a lot of armies, then yeah, it kind of creates a... it kind of really degrades the performance that you're going to see in a campaign. Because you see stacks upon stacks of troops, and that's obviously impacting performance. I guess I'm getting at the point where I need a new CPU for my computer. But still, it's like you look at this, for instance, and you follow up with this, then more and more armies. It's like then like the free stacks for the sacred pools. It's like, what is going on over here? And then Alberic's like 4 stacks or 3 stacks, just chilling with 2 stacks from the Hunts Marshal. That's just so ridiculous. I'm sorry. That's so absurd. That's too much, and it's too much for too little territory. I think, like, generally speaking, a better way to design it is we make garrisons weaker, because, like, the AI is going to struggle to expand. It's going to expand more slowly, so it's not going to be able to keep up with the player. Like, here's the thing. Like, some people would say, well, why don't you just play more slowly? To which my reply would be, did you guys ever play Legendary in Shogun 2? Because I did. Did you play Legendary in Rome 2 or Attila? I did. The reason I push for so much early game aggression is I've played every game on Legendary since it was introduced as a difficulty, and I gotta tell you, if you don't play aggressively, you're gonna get your ass handed to you. So that's the reason for aggression. That's the reason for pushing for so much aggression in a campaign. And the problem with garrisons, like, they're not gonna stop you. Like, no garrison in the world. I don't care if, if there were 20, like, if I was playing Tyrion and there were 20 units in the ancient city of Quintex, they probably would be, by default. And the thing is, I can win battles. If you're a good enough player, you can win battles, like, 2-1. You get used to it, because that's been the legendary experience in the game since the very beginning of legendary. So if you're playing normal, yeah, okay, maybe that's difficult for you. But if you're playing legendary and you got used to it, and you got used to it from many experiences, many games, then it's not unbeatable. You plan, you build your entire empire around the idea of it. Now over here, for instance, I'm actually in a vulnerable state because I didn't expect necessarily Tyrion to have like 4 stacks in Lawfern and then 2 other stacks over here that he could throw against me. Yeah, that was a mixed calculation. Like, he took this element, so he had 2 stacks over here that he's throwing against me. So this is one of the rare situations where I'm actually going to be under attack. Now, if I had more money, if I could get my hands on more money, I could just emergency recruit some regiments renown. Like over here, I'm just gonna beat Tyrion with the units I have, maybe a couple of regiments renown. I probably will be able to just out-resolve him. Like 30 units is ultimately gonna matter in that. By the way, the problem of having strong garrisons is, like, you're screwing the AI even further, because, like, yeah, it's 30 units that Tyrion has to overcome with 20. The AI is really bad at attacking multiple armies at the same point. There's many times, and like the most difficult situations you may encounter in a campaign in general is when the AI throws multiple armies at the same target. But that's relatively rare, and generally happens with Greenskins or Skaven. Fair enough. But, like, High Elves doing it. So these stronger garrisons are not helping you, are not slowing you down or stopping you, and especially now with these resources, they're impeding the AI. So that's one of the issues I do have with it, same issue as SFO. Less of a problem here because of the massive cache of resources, but AI behavior is still AI behavior in Warhammer 3. Vanilla behavior or modded behavior, it doesn't matter. Because, like, Tyrion might think he should win over all of this. He won't, I might add. One of the things you can do to balance it is use an auto-resolve mod that removes the auto-resolve benefit from settlements, so you don't have to fight as many freaking settlement battles, but also crucially, it helps the AI as well. So that's one of the things you can do. That's one of the things I've been using in this campaign. That's probably the reason that Tyrion is attacking there. I don't know. I mean, to be fair, he probably should win that battle. Like, if it actually came to a manual battle over here, probably would win. Like, that's the thing. Like, I'm not believing that this army is going to stop freaking Tyrion, of all people. No. That's why I'm going to recruit some regiments renowned over here too, or as many as I have access to, assuming I can get more money. Let's get more slaves. Let's use the slaves for money. And yeah, just assume that this particular settlement is going to fall to the hands of the AI. Sometimes you just got to accept the price of your mistakes. Sometimes. Like, yeah, the AI having more resources, though, creates a kind of situation where it's like, you can't just show up in the province, defeat one army, and that's a major impact, because they'll have 4 more. Maybe that's a bit too much, though, but all the same. So, like, I do like the campaign starts of Radius. I do like the stronger economies. I do like that taking territory actually feels meaningful. I do like the unit variety in a campaign that you're actually going to use. I do like the fact that you're probably going to get access to stuff relatively early when it matters. All that. Just like the garrisons and the performance impact of too many armies. But, you know, probably 40% upkeep plus 40% upkeep on a campaign would probably help solve a lot of, all of those issues, except the garrison problem. By the way, that's all I had to say. Christine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.